Okay, last day in lesson 4.8. Last day should have been yesterday, but last day today is going to be today. Oh, Cyrus logged on. Sorry. Okay. As we look at this lesson, I asked you guys to be trying example 6B. Yes. Mm-hmm. Welcome. Okay. 5x squared plus 20 equals 0. Do you guys remember how to solve this from yesterday? Yeah. What's your job if you have 5x squared plus 20 equals 0? Okay, subtract the 20. We're trying to get our x squared by itself, yes? So if I subtract the 20 over, I now have 5x squared equals negative 20. Now what do I do to get x squared by itself? Divide by 5. And then I have x squared equals negative 4. Hello? Uh-huh. Okie dokie. Uh-huh. Bye. That's you, Carly. I was told I have time to give you your assignment and then you can go to the office. So, finish for tomorrow. Okay, guys. X squared equals negative 4. What's my next step? Take the square root. In order to get x squared to become an x, we take the square root. If you take the square root of x squared, take the square root of negative 4. What is the square root of x squared? X. What is the square root of negative 4?
2. Well, 2i. Plus or minus 2i.
Okay, so the square root of 4 is 2. Because it's the square root of a negative, we have to tack on an I. So 2i. Because we're taking the square root in an equation setting, we have to say plus or minus 2i. I think I heard all those pieces out there. It was just a matter of getting them all together into one final answer. Okay, so remember, when you take the square root of a negative, you can take a square root of a negative as long as we're working in our complex numbers. You just put an I in its place. Okay? Got it? So did you guys try C? Just curious if you figured out C or not. Okay. How do we solve to get x squared by itself? First step we should all be able to do. If it's x squared plus 15, we're going to subtract 15. So then it's x squared equals negative 15. How do you solve once you have it as x squared equals? We're going to take the square root. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of negative 15.
Square root of 15i.
Depends how you write that. Okay, so, and I'm not, okay, so plus or minus, square root of 15, and I. Now, here's what I'm not going to write it as plus or minus square root of 15i. Because the question becomes, where is that I? Is the I under the radical or is it outside the radical? And that matters. Okay, that makes the difference between right and wrong, and Math Excel will definitely tell you that. Okay, so I'm going to put that I out front because we're taking the square root in the equation, 5 times 3, which doesn't do anything. So square root of 15 there. So plus or minus I times the square root of 15 is the best way to write your answer there. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to count it wrong if you put the I afterwards, but the I has to be outside of the radical. It is so easy to get sloppy there, is my concern, and then I have to make that judgment call of, well, did they put their I out of the radical or under the radical? Okay, so that's my warning that best practice is to put the I out front, just like you would any variable. Yes?
I guess I need to know this is a little bit behind. Why do we use the plus and minus?
This goes back to what we did earlier in the chapter. When you take the square root in an equation setting, there's always two possible answers, the positive root and the negative root.
Okay.
Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. It's just a matter of tying it into this. Yeah. Okay. Now, solving those equations was pretty easy because they just had an x squared, right? Now we have equations in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. Well, what's our plan to solve these? This is our quadratic formula, okay? I mean, you might, but I'll tell you right now, if they're in this lesson where we're talking about imaginary numbers, they're not going to factor because they're going to have imaginary answers. And so we're not going to factor. We're going to be using the quadratic formula. Now, what's the first thing you have to make sure of when you use the quadratic formula about your equation? Yeah, make sure, does your equation equal 0? Okay, so always make sure that that equation equals 0 before you get your A, B, and C, right? Do we remember our quadratic formula?
B minus negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC. I did not remember that. We probably all should have said it at the same time instead of. I was trying to remember that German kid song.
I say I heard some of you guys trying to get the sing song in there. So, okay, square root or x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, work on knowing that, guys. That's just a good math formula to know. We use it enough, it's good to know. Now, I'm going to jump into example A. Does my equation equal 0? Yes. I'm going to go ahead and write down my ABCs. I'm not saying you have to, but just good practice to make sure everyone's on the right path here. What's A? 2, because it's the coefficient of x squared. What's B? Negative 3, because it's the coefficient of x. And what's C? 5, because it's the constant. Sound familiar? Okay. X equals negative b. What's negative b in this case? 3. Positive 3. Plus or minus the square root. B squared, so negative 3 squared, minus 4, times a, which is 2, times c, which is 5, all over 2a, 2 times 2. When you're doing this on paper, this is the type of work I would expect you to see written out, right? Okay, write that out for me. 3 plus or minus, what's negative 3 squared? 9. Minus 4 times 2 times 5. 40. All over 4. And I'm just putting this here so we have it in the work. Some of you, I get, would probably have gone ahead and put those pieces together, right? So if you haven't already, 3 plus or minus the square root of, what's 9 minus 40? Negative 31. All over 4. Here's a heads up. If you don't get a negative under that radical today, for today's purposes, you've probably done something wrong. Your radical's always going to come up to be negative today, right? That's because we're working with imaginaries. So, okay, continuing along. 3 plus or minus what about that square root of negative 31? What kind of simplifying can we do there? Okay. The negative comes out front, and we're going to put that negative out front as an I, because the square root of negative 1 is equal to I. Anything else you can do with 31? No. 31 is what kind of number? Prime number, because it only has factors of 1 in itself. Okay, so we can put the negative out front as an I, but 31 staying under the radical. All over 4. Now, in a normal quadratic solution situation, when you did these last time, Math Excel let you leave it as this, right? And there's a chance Math Excel would let you leave it as this today, but again, we're working with complex numbers, so they often want it in that form, A plus BI. Or in this case, it's going to be A plus or minus BI. So real part plus or minus imaginary part. What's that essentially mean? This 4 that's in the denominator goes with both pieces in the numerator, right? So the 4 goes with the 3. So 3 over 4, or in other words, 3/4, plus or minus. And then the 4 also goes with the I radical 31. You could write it as I radical 31 over 4. That's fine. Or you could write it as 3/4 plus or minus radical 31 over 4 times the I after the fraction. I am fine with either or. I would like to think Math Excel is fine with either or. But you never know with Math Excel. The key is the I cannot be under the radical. And the I cannot be in the denominator. How'd that quadratic formula go for you? Okay. Here's my question to you. Do we need 1 or 2 more quadratic formula examples? I mean, the point is, there's 2 more we can do. I don't know if I feel it's necessary that we do both of them. And if we're just going to do 1, I was going to skip to C. Not that you can't do B on your own. Not that I couldn't look up and check and see what the answer is. But I want to talk about how C works out. Okay, you ready for C? What's the first question you're asking yourself? Does it equal 0? And does it equal 0? It does equal 0. That's good. What's the next question? I like to ask and write down, what are my ABCs? Okay. You may not exactly write that down, but what's A on example C? A is 1, B is -4, and C is 5. I'm going to zoom into this particular problem here. Okay, quadratic formula, can you fill it in? X equals what? 4, because it's -b. Then what? Plus or minus. Square root. -4 squared. -4 times 1 times 5, so -4ac. Over 2a, or 2 times 1. I'll tell you guys, when we do a test, that's a point right there in my book. Because if I'm grading it and you make a mistake in your math, at least setting it up right from the beginning will earn you something with me, because that tells me you understand how to fill in your quadratic formula. Okay? If you make a mistake from the setup, that makes it harder for me to give you a point, but okay, 4 plus or minus. What is happening under that radical? Okay, negative 4 squared is positive 16. Minus 4 times 1 times 5 is minus 20. All over 2. If you didn't already, 16 minus 20 is negative 4. So I personally am at the point of having 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 all over 2. What are your thoughts here? Square root of negative 4 is 2i. Because this time we can do the square root of 4. Yes, square root of 4 is 2. Because it was of a negative number, we put in I, because the square root of negative 1 is I. So 4 plus or minus 2i all over 2. Good. Again, don't leave it as one big fraction, right? With the imaginary, split it up. What am I splitting this up into? Okay. 4 over 2 plus or minus 2i over 2. However, we're smarter than that. We're not going to stop there, right? We're going to reduce that because that definitely cleans up nicely. What's that clean up to be? 2 plus or minus I. Does that stick with the theme of this chapter of having 2 answers for every quadratic equation we solve? Yes, because one answer is 2 plus I. The other answer is 2 minus I. So it sticks with the theme of having 2 answers. Okay. There's a lot in lesson 4.8. I get it. Okay. There's a lot to do with the eyes. Going forward, you have to have a good grasp of dealing with the eyes. Okay. So, I'm going to give you guys work time, I think. Will you use work time? You still have homework to work on? I have a feeling there's probably a few of you that have it done, but use the work time is what I'm going to say, okay?